This video contains depictions of fictional blood and gore, as well as minor spoilers for various Wolfenstein games. On May 5th, 1992, a little game called Wolfenstein 3D was released. And about a year later, I mean almost immediately, it was outclassed by the first Doom. But for one brief, beautiful year, it was the grandfather of all modern FPS games, pioneering the genre in just about every way. So isn't it kind of strange that it never received any sequels? I'm not talking about the prequels, Spear of Destiny, nor any of the later titles like Return to Castle Wolfenstein and the Machine Games ones, which more or less retconned it out of existence. I'm talking about a direct continuation of Wolfenstein 3D's story. Well, you read the title, and of course that planned it, though more as an expansion pack than a standalone game, I suppose similar to the mission packs of Spear of Destiny. It was going to be called Wolfenstein 3D Part 2, very original, with the subtitle Rise of the Triad. Yes, that Rise of the Triad, something we'll be getting into later. However, its software ended up losing interest, especially with Doom being right around the corner. But when Tom Ho, the creative director of the company, ended up leaving, he took the idea with him. Still, he wasn't satisfied having to restrict the concept to the existing Wolfenstein universe. He wanted to do more. And thus, the connection was dropped, and together with elements he had planned for Doom initially, like different playable characters, Rise of the Triad was born. But in this video, I'd like to look at that original concept, see how closely it matches both the final game and Wolfenstein, as well as how things might have been different had it been released. And then I'll decide whether the idea to can it was a good one or not. I'll be looking at the actual design specifications by Tom Ho from September 1993 that were uploaded online by 3D Realms. This is not a comprehensive look at all the changes, so check it out yourself if you're curious. Let's start with the story. After killing Hitler at the end of Wolfenstein 3D, spoilers by the way, it's revealed that there were actually 3 shadowy corporations that helped them rise to power for their own gain, called the Triad. Now that he's dead, they want to take over the world themselves, threatening it with total nuclear annihilation. So BJ gets called in once more to sort this one out. In the first episode, he'd have traveled to the Triad's fortress, located in an old monastery on top of a mountain in Gotha, Germany. After gaining access, he'd have searched for the keys to the headquarters deep below in episode 2. Upon doing so, BJ would have entered the catacombs underneath the castle, where he'd encounter the 3 Triad leaders in the 3rd episode. But oops, it turns out that activated a machine called the Zendenkina, not a real word by the way, that in the event of their deaths would destroy all life on the planet, likely via nukes. So in the last episode, you'd have to destroy the machine, which could end in either triumph or failure. As for how you tackle these challenges, it was going to be more the same. But instead of just hunting for keys, the player would also need to activate switches and touch plates. The game would also add a few gimmicks such as items to tables, darkness, destructible environments, barrels to blow up, and even traps like heat grates and spears coming down from the ceiling. Quick note, not all of these sprites are from the original design spec, but I'll talk more about that later. Luckily, the player's arsenal was to also receive an upgrade. The knife, pistol, machine gun and chain gun all return, though the knife seems to have gotten demoted to an item you'd only get from certain statues at one point. However, the Triad chain gun would have made its debut here, essentially being a much stronger variant of the regular one. And for the first time outside the console ports, the player would have been able to shoot projectiles in the form of the bazooka, the grenade launcher, nerve gas launcher, and a heat seeker. And what good are weapons if you have nobody to use them on? So of course, there's plenty of enemies serving as target practice. Interestingly, the design document contains both notes on them as well as sprites, which kind of contradict the former and were likely from later stages. I also had to guess which graphics belong to whom, as it's not always clear, and some of these are also my own mockups. Returning foes are the standard guards, now wearing purple, yes, purple uniforms, the officers with red uniforms and grey vests, the actual SS again for some reason, now in green clothes, the inhabitants of the necropolis in the form of skeletons replacing the mutants, and dogs which are the same as before. There's even alternate variants of the officers, some with brown uniforms, and some with straight up SS uniforms, red armband and all. It's possible that these were meant to be the quote smart officers, really living up to the name by being faster, deadlier, and even seeking out health. That's an honestly impressive concept, one that hasn't been done again even in games today. These guys would have likely also thrown nets at the player that they'd have to cut down with a knife. Other tougher enemy variations include the demon dogs, whose eyes are glowing red. and the Blitz guards, the lightning guards, who looked about the same as the regular ones. There's also the Triad enforcers, basically a tougher SS, described here as, quote, big as Hans Große, but with fewer hit points so they can be used constantly. They're even said to have been a mix between Hans and ninjas throwing Triad-shaped shurikens. And finally, keeping up with the monastery theme, there's two types of death monks. The first one would have functioned similarly to the Pac-Man ghosts, draining your health when they got too close. The second one was much like the fake Hitlers, shooting red balls out of their eyes from afar. Overall, quite the impressive roster, but it gets even better, because of course there's also bosses. Starting with Guderian, who would shoot at you from inside his cage, requiring you to activate pressure plates to get inside to fight him. Afterwards, you'd have gone up against Heinrich Christ, a wheelchair-bound man who'd attack you via circles of bombs. The last human boss would have been the Schwarzen Mönch, which should really be Mönch, translating to Black Monk, though he's called Dark Monk here. This one would have only turned vulnerable when stepping over heat grates. Finally, there's the Oberroboter, the head robot, which would fall apart over the course of the battle, as well as the Zendenkener robot guards, described as, quote, clunky robots, some with arms, some with guns. What's strange is that the story dictates you'd fight all three Triad leaders in episode 3, while it seems more likely for them to be featured at the end of each episode. Maybe Tom Hall wrote that a bit confusingly. And thus ends the document. However, in March of 2023, a prototype of the game from between February to September 1993 was leaked. This is where some of the sprites I showed earlier came from. I'll keep it brief and you can look at everything yourself afterwards, link is below. This one features some interesting differences. For instance, the guards aren't purple after all here, but wear grey uniforms with the Triad logo on them. The officer kept his spaceman looking design, however. And here we can even see what one of the monks might have looked like, casting fireballs from his hands instead of bolts from his eyes. Both the design document and this leaked prototype are fascinating, since they show how far they got with the project, while simultaneously not getting very far at all. In classic Tom Hall fashion, the design was nailed down from the start, but the actual gameplay, not quite. So, if you've played Rise of the Triad, the standalone game, all of this sounds very familiar to you, and that's no surprise. The items on tables, destructible environments, explosive barrels, and the traps all made it into the final product, with especially the ladder being expanded upon. The chain guns may have gotten completely axed, but the bazooka and heatseeker weren't. While the grenade and nerf gas launcher were also cut, it's possible they became the firebomb and flameball weapons. The similarities are even more obvious with the enemies, as the designs often match very closely, like the regular lightning guards, as well as the officers who got turned into the strike team. The smart officers likely ended up as the Over Patrol, considering the similar clothes. The enforcers got fully realized, though now throwing grenades instead of shurikens. Actually, this would explain why sad grenades aren't affected by gravity, because they couldn't be bothered to update them. And of course, both variants of the Death Monks were implemented as well. The bosses are also almost exact conversions. Guderian became General Darien, while Heinrich Christ became Sebastian Christ, both having the same designs, attacks, and ways of beating them. The Oberroboter was turned into the NME, which likewise falls apart over the course of the battle. However, it's not the final boss anymore. Instead, that honor was given to the Schwarzen Mönch, who was renamed to El Escuro while keeping his vulnerability to fire. Other similarities include Teredito Cassette, who is essentially BJ, especially if you factor the sprites from Wolfenstein 2. Furthermore, the concept of failing the game if you don't destroy the Zendenkener seems to have gotten revisited in Rise of the Triad, where the same happens if you don't blow up all of Oscuro's larvae. It also fascinates me how many things ROTT has in common with Wolfenstein, even after all the drastic changes. For instance, some levels are only one block tall, completely forgoing any verticality. In others, the jump pads and floating platforms feel more like an afterthought, as if they just added them when the map's already mostly complete. I'm highly suspecting that especially these stages were taken straight from the early prototypes and only marginally altered, which also goes for the boss stages. On the other hand, it's interesting to see how many of the concepts from Wolfenstein 3D Part 2 were revisited in later games. The Triad base being located on top of a giant mountain is something that's appeared all throughout the series, with the crypts below heavily reminding me of Return to Castle Wolfenstein and the Oblat. And the idea of the fall of the Triad ringing in the apocalypse is the main plot of Youngblood, where Hitler's death activated the Doomsday device. Even the alternate history angle is very similar to what Machine Games titles did, only that they doubled down on the P-Babies, while Rise of the Triad suggested they were merely a facade for a bigger evil. So, the question is, should Wolfenstein 3D Part 2 have come out or not? Well, I'm really torn. Rise of the Triad definitely has more of its own identity and humor, and added many interesting concepts of its own. Things like ludicrous jibs, God mode and dog mode, or even just the "here, catch," make it truly unique. It's much more tongue-in-cheek, even more than games like Duke Nukem 3D. On the flip side, it also has many elements that feel more tacked on. The aforementioned verticality barely adds anything to the gameplay, as there's no real height variation and the platforms can actively get in your way. The traps, while imaginative, just boil down to wait for a bit or find the power-up to bypass them, neither option being engaging. And although levels are larger, they're also too large at times, making them a slog to navigate. I don't think I've used the map more often in a game than I did in this one. Meanwhile, the parts that did work, like the enemy and weapon variety, were always intended from the start. So it's not like anything important would have been missing. Even the shortcomings like the traps would have been more excusable for a quick add-on than a full game, with the verticality issues being non-existent in the first place. But how would the other Wolfenstein games have been affected? I like the idea of ditching P-Babies and focusing on a new evil, as that way the games aren't connected to real-world atrocities and are much easier to enjoy. But if they'd already gone down the alternate history route, would games like Return to Castle Wolfenstein and Wolfenstein 2009 not even have happened, and we'd have skipped straight to the new order? I mean, Quake 2 already deviated heavily from Quake 1, with later games barely resembling the first one anymore. I like World War II games a lot, but they're getting rarer and rarer these days, even in the Wolfenstein series. So I feel it would have suffered from the same issues. I think at best, Wolfenstein 3D 2 would have been received similarly to the Blake Stone titles, as those already shared many of the same mechanics. I highly doubt it would have been a cult classic like Rise of the Triad is these days, despite all its issues. Because at least that one has more of its own personality. In the end, it wouldn't have mattered anyway. Because like I said at the start, Doom was already on the horizon, and only a game like Quake could outclass that one. Not one whose levels were still made using Minecraft cubes. But I'd love to hear what you think. Maybe you believe it would have made for a better game overall, even if it wouldn't have aged so well. Do tell me below. And if you've enjoyed the video, then please show me that by leaving a like, a comment, subscribing to my channel, and even by donating directly to my Patreon to support me further. Anything is appreciated. But for now, thank you very much for watching, have a wonderful day, and goodbye.